The company that stole a continent, a true story of power, profit, and the making of British India. The merchant who became a king. McCarran. A humid morning in August 1765. A quiet ceremony took place in the city of Allahabad. There were no cheering crowds, no trumpets, no dramatic declarations, just a defeated emperor and a company. The emperor, Shah Alam II, sat with the weight of a collapsing empire pressing down on his shoulders. Across from him stood not a king, not a general, but representatives of a trading corporation, the East India Company. In that moment, with a stroke of a pen, the company was granted the right to collect revenue from Bengal, the richest province in India, and just like that, a business became a ruler. No invasion, no crown, just profit. A company is born 1600 long before it ruled millions. The East India Company was nothing more than an ambitious idea. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter granting a group of London merchants exclusive rights to trade with the East Indies. At the time, it seemed like a gamble. Portuguese and Dutch traders already dominated the world. England was late to the game, but these merchants believed in something powerful. That wealth lay not in land, but in trade. Spices, silk, cotton, tea. They weren't looking to conquer India, they were looking to buy from it. First footsteps in India. When the campaign ships first reached the shores of India in the early 1600s, they encountered a world far more powerful than anything they had imagined. The Mughal Empire was at its peak. Its emperor, Jahangir, ruled over a vast and wealthy land. His courts dazzled with gold, jewels, and art. His armies were immense. Compared to this, the English were insignificant merchants, outsiders, begging for permission to trade. And yet, they were patient. They built small trading posts, factories in places like Surat, Madras, and Calcutta. They smiled. They negotiated. They waited. The turning point war for profit for over a century. The company remained a trading entity, but something changed in the mid-1700s. The Mughal Empire began to crumble. Regional powers rose. Chaos spread. And the company saw an opportunity. In 1757, on a field near the village of Plassey, a battle took place that would change history forever. The Battle of Plassey. On one side stood Sir Robert Clive and a small company force. On the other stood the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj ad-Daulah, with a vastly larger army. By all logic, the company should have lost. But war is not always decided by strength. Sometimes, it's decided by betrayal. Clive had secretly negotiated with key commanders in the Nawab's army. When the battle began, they stood still. They watched. They did nothing. Siraj ad-Daulah was defeated. And with that victory, the company didn't just win a battle. It gained control of Bengal, one of the richest regions in the world, from traders to rulers. After Plassey, everything changed. The East India Company began collecting taxes. It appointed officials. It controlled courts. It minted money. It ruled. Imagine this for a moment. A private company, governing millions of people. No elections. No accountability, only profit. In London, shareholders celebrated rising dividends. But in Bengal, a different story unfolded. Farmers were taxed heavily. Local industries were crushed. Wealth flowed outward to Britain. And then came the famine, the Bengal famine. Profit over people. In 1770, Bengal was struck by one of the worst famines in history. Millions died. Villages disappeared. Fields turned to dust, yet the company continued collecting taxes. Relentlessly. Coldly. Reports suggest that up to 10 million people perished, but in London, profit still mattered more. The company had become something dangerous, not just powerful, but indifferent. America watches class ally across the Atlantic. Events in India did not go unnoticed. In the American colonies, people were growing restless. Under British rule, taxes, monopolies, corporate power, Sound familiar? The Boston Tea Party was directly linked to the company. The British government had granted it special privileges to sell tea in America. Colonists saw it as corruption, control, exploitation. In many ways, the story of the East India Company in India became a warning, a glimpse of what unchecked corporate power could do. The company's army by the early 1800s. The company had built something astonishing. An army. Not a small one, a massive professional force, larger than most European nations, composed largely of Indian soldiers, sepoys commanded by British officers. With this army, the company expanded its control across the subcontinent. Through war, through treaties, through manipulation, kingdom after kingdom fell, and slowly, almost silently, India was no longer a collection of independent states. It was becoming a corporate empire. The man who tried to govern Chowsby the time Warren Hastings took charge in 1772, the East India Company was no longer just a trading corporation. It was a fragile empire teetering on the edge of collapse. Corruption was everywhere. Company officials, many barely in their 20s, had come to India as clerks and returned to England as millionaires. They were called nabobs, men who had extracted enormous wealth through bribes, private trade, and manipulation of local rulers. The system was broken. Hastings knew it, and for the first time, someone inside the company tried to impose order. He reorganized revenue collection. He attempted to bring Indian legal traditions into British administration. He tried to reduce corruption, not eliminate it, because that was impossible, but control it. But Hastings faced a brutal reality. How do you govern a land you barely understand? India was not a single nation. It was a mosaic of languages, religions, cultures, and kingdoms, and the company understood almost none of it. The trial that shook Britain back in London, whispers had turned into outrage. Stories of exploitation, famine, and corruption in India reached the British public. Politicians began to question whether a private company should rule millions. At the center of this storm stood Hastings. In 1787, he was put on trial in one of the most dramatic political events of the century, his impeachment. The charges were severe: abuse of power, corruption, mismanagement of India. The trial was led by Edmund Burke, a man who believed the company's actions in India were not just wrong, but morally catastrophic. Burke famously argued that the company had turned governance into greed and empire into exploitation. The trial lasted 7 years. In the end, Hastings was acquitted, but something had changed forever. For the first time, Britain began to realize India was too important and too dangerous to be left in the hands of a company, the expansion machine. While politicians debated in London, the company continued expanding in India, relentlessly, under leaders like Lord Wellesley. The company adopted a new strategy: control through alliances. Indian rulers were offered protection, but protection came with conditions. They had to accept British troops in their territory. They had to pay for those troops, and they had to give up control of their foreign policy. This system, known as the Subsidiary Alliance, was brilliant and ruthless. It allowed the company to control kingdoms without directly ruling them, and if a ruler refused, war. The fall of great kingdoms. One by one, powerful Indian states fell under company control. The kingdom of Mysore, ruled by the fierce and innovative Tipu Sultan, resisted fiercely. Tipu was not like other rulers. He modernized his army. He used rockets in war for decades before they were seen in Europe. He allied with France. He understood the threat, and he fought it. But in 1799, after a brutal siege of Srirangapatna, Tipu Sultan was killed. His body was found among the fallen. The tiger of Mysore was gone, and with him, one of the last great hopes of stopping the company's rise, the doctrine of expansion. By the mid-1800s, the company no longer pretended to be just a trading entity. It was an empire, and it wanted more. Under Lord Dalhousie, a new policy emerged: a doctrine of lapse. If an Indian ruler died without a natural heir, His kingdom would be annexed by the company. No negotiations. No exceptions. Kingdoms like Jhansi and Nagpur were taken this way. For many Indians, this was not just political aggression. It was personal. Sacred traditions were being ignored, dynasties erased, histories ended, and anger began to build. The soldiers whisper at the heart of the company's power was its army. Hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers, sepoys, served under British command. They were loyal, disciplined, essential, but beneath the surface, something was changing. Rumors began to spread. Whispers in barracks. Stories passed quietly from one soldier to another. It was about the new Enfield rifle. Load it. Soldiers had to bite open cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat. For Hindu soldiers, the cow was sacred. For Muslim soldiers, the pig was forbidden. The rumor struck at the core of their beliefs, and whether it was true or not, it didn't matter, because belief is powerful. And anger, once ignited, spreads fast. The spark of rebellion. 1857. In May 1857, in the town of Meerut, that anger exploded. Sepoys refused orders. They revolted. They killed British officers, and then they marched to Delhi. There, they declared the aging Mughal Emperor, Bahadur Shah II, as their leader. It was a symbolic act, a call to restore a lost empire. What followed was not just a mutiny. It was a full-scale uprising. The Indian Rebellion of 1857. Across northern India, cities rose. Soldiers rebelled. Civilians joined. Old grievances turned into open war. For the first time in over a century, the company faced a threat it could not easily control. Fire and blood. The rebellion was brutal. On both sides. In places like Kanpur and Lucknow, violence spiraled into massacres. British civilians were killed. Rebel fighters were executed. Villages were burned. No one was innocent. No one was safe. The company, shocked and enraged, responded with overwhelming force. Reinforcements arrived from Britain. Delhi was retaken. The rebellion was crushed, but at a terrible cost. The end of the Commonwealth events of 1857 changed everything. The British government could no longer trust the East India Company. It had lost control, and nearly lost India. In 1858, the British Crown took direct control of India. The company was dissolved. After more than 250 years, the most powerful corporation in history ceased to exist. India became a colony of the British Empire, and a new chapter began. The Crown takes the throne in 1858. After the smoke of rebellion had settled and the rivers of northern India had run red, a quiet but decisive shift took place. The East India Company, the corporation that had ruled the subcontinent, was gone. In its place stood something far more powerful, the British Crown. Queen Victoria issued a proclamation that would reshape the destiny of millions. India was no longer a corporate possession. It was now part of an empire. Her empire. Promises were made, promises of religious tolerance, fair governance, and respect for Indian traditions. The Crown declared that it would not interfere in local customs, that it would treat its Indian subjects with justice. But for many, these words felt hollow, because memory does not disappear so easily. The Raj began the era known as the British Raj, a system of direct imperial rule that would last nearly 9 years. At its head was the Viceroy, the Crown's representative in India. Beneath him, a vast administrative network stretched across the land. British officials governing provinces, collecting taxes, enforcing laws. Railways were built, telegraphs connected cities, modern education systems were introduced. To British observers, it looked like progress. To many Indians, it felt like control. The railways, for instance, were not built merely to connect people, they were built to move resources quickly. Cotton, tea, and indigo raw materials flowed from India to Britain, fueling its industries. India was becoming the engine of an empire. but not for its own benefit. A divided land. After the rebellion of 1857, the British adopted a new strategy: divide and rule. They understood something critical. A united India was dangerous. So they encouraged divisions. Religious, ethnic, social policies were designed in ways that separated communities. Representation was structured along religious lines. Suspicion was quietly nurtured. Hindus and Muslims, who had lived side by side for centuries, were now increasingly seen as separate political entities. It was a slow process, subtle, but powerful, and its consequences would echo far into the future. The rise of a new India. By the late 19th century, something unexpected began to happen. A new class of Indians emerged, educated, articulate, politically aware. Many had studied in British institutions, learned English, and read Western philosophy. They understood the language of rights, liberty, and governance, and they began to ask questions. If Britain believed in democracy, why not in India? If liberty was a universal value, why were Indians denied it? In 1885, a group of these thinkers came together to form the Indian National Congress. First, their demands were modest: more representation, more say in governance. But beneath those demands lay something deeper: a growing sense of identity, of nationhood, of India. The Empire Strikes Back. British were not blind to these developments. They responded with caution and control. Reforms were introduced, but always limited. Power was shared, but never surrendered. And when dissent grew louder, repression followed. One of the most shocking moments came in 1919 in the city of Amritsar. A peaceful gathering had assembled in a garden known as Jallianwala Bagh. They were unarmed: men, women, children. Then, without warning, British troops under General Reginald Dyer opened fire. The exits were blocked. There was nowhere to run. Hundreds were killed. Many more were wounded. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre sent shockwaves across India and the world. It shattered any remaining illusions about British rule, and it ignited something unstoppable. The man who refused to fight out of this turmoil emerged a figure unlike any other. A man who would challenge an empire without weapons: Mahatma Gandhi. He did not command armies. He did not call for violence. Instead, he spoke of something radical: non-violence, civil disobedience. He believed that the moral force of truth, what he called satyagraha, could defeat even the mightiest empire. Many doubted him. How could peaceful resistance stand against guns and prisons? But Gandhi understood something profound. Empires rely on obedience, and if millions refused to obey, the empire would falter. Sultan defiance in 1930. Gandhi chose something simple: salt, a basic necessity of life taxed by the British. He began a march, a long, deliberate walk from his ashram to the sea. Hundreds joined him, then thousands, then millions watched. At the end of the march, Gandhi bent down, picked up a handful of salt, and broke the law. It was a small act, but its meaning was immense. Across India, people followed his example. They made their own salt. They boycotted British goods. They refused to cooperate. The empire responded with arrests. Gandhi was imprisoned. So were thousands of others. But the movement did not stop, because the idea had taken root. A world at war. As the struggle for independence intensified, the world itself was changing. In 1939, World War II erupted. Britain was fighting for survival, and once again, India became crucial. Indian soldiers were sent across the world to fight in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Millions served, thousands died. Yet India itself remained under colonial rule. The contradiction was glaring. How could a nation fight for freedom abroad while denying it at home? The pressure mounted. The demand for independence grew louder, more urgent, more determined. The final countdown be the mid-1940s. It was clear: British rule in India could not continue. The cost was too high. The resistance ceased. Strong leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah emerged at the forefront of negotiations. But there was a problem, a deep, painful division. The question was no longer just independence. It was unity. Could India remain one nation? Or would it be divided? Freedom and fracture. In August 1947, the answer came. India would be free. But it would also be divided. Two nations were born, India and Pakistan. It should have been a moment of celebration. And for many, it was. But it was also a time of unimaginable tragedy. Communal violence erupted. Millions were forced to leave their homes. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs' neighbors turned into refugees. Estimates suggest that over 1 million people lost their lives, and over 14 million were displaced. It was one of the largest migrations in human history. The shadow of a company, East India Company, was long gone by 1947, but its shadow remained. It had arrived as a business. It had ruled as an empire, and it had left behind a legacy that still shapes the world today. Borders, economies, conflicts, identities. For an American audience, the story carries a powerful message. What happens when a corporation gains too much power? What happens when profit overrides humanity? And what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough?